Hi, and welcome to Women's Health Unwrapped with me, Nicola Fondell, a weekly show dedicated to empowering women to unlock the secrets of true health and vitality. So join me as we unwrap what healthy living really means with another guest expert today who I know you are going to take so much from. Gail Grace is joining me to share her own story, which is going to help you get clear on how you can better manage stress and improve your overall health and happiness and build some healthy habits, which is what we're essentially all about on the podcast. So I'd love you to join as I speak to Gail, who is a personal performance and wellbeing coach specializing in burnout prevention, having experienced her own life changes due to chronic stress, anxiety, and burnout. And all of those three things, stress, anxiety, and burnout, are rising with women. We're seeing increasing rates of burnout, and having experienced it myself, I know just how debilitating and impactful it can be. Now, Gail supports clients in building confidence, managing stress, overcoming limiting beliefs. You're going to hear Gail share a lot about what you can do to really build self-awareness in better understanding who you are, what matters to you, why you act and respond and feel in a certain way, and to really look at those stresses in life and how they play out as actual stress. We're going to talk quite a bit about what stress is, and something I really enjoyed in this conversation is how Gail talked about her experience in corporate and having this perception that it was just because her job was stressful, that, this stress was an inevitable and, essential part of being employed and being an employee in a manager role. And so everybody else seemed to be managing, and why wasn't she able to manage? Which meant in turn, there must be something wrong with her. Something that I know many of us can, believe. We put a lot of stresses and stress onto ourselves. So lots to unwrap and share with you in such an insightful conversation. And of course, you're going to hear Gail's 3 tips at the end to take some small steps to begin better caring for yourself and reducing stress. So get ready for a fantastic conversation. Hi Gail, welcome to Women's Health Unwrapped. It's great to have you with me.
Hello, yeah, it's great to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to chatting with you about a subject that I know is very common at the moment for lots and lots of women. And yeah, I think your story is one that will resonate with so many people, which I'm looking forward to unpacking. Just before we get into all of that, I'd love to know from you what your own most impactful healthy habit is at the moment.
Oh, yeah, that's a good question. So I think just to slow down a little bit is what I'm focusing on at the moment. I've got lots going on. We're in the middle of huge renovation works in the house, obviously running my own business. I've got 2 small kids. And yeah, so my main healthy habit at the moment is just taking some time to slow down and appreciate what's going on around me rather than rushing through it.
And that's not always easy to do, as I'm
It's
sure
not.
we'll come on to. Have you got any tips, and is there anything that helps you to make sure you are slowing down?
I think it's really just about, like all of these habits, it's practice. And I think it's just about trying not to make it too much of a big thing, but just taking those little pauses, like build up, just little pauses, little breaths, little moments, not rushing from one thing to another. The main thing is I'm trying to find moments in between moving from work to school pickup to, all those kind of transition moments, just taking a moment in those kind of transitions has helped.
Great. So to get us started with the topic of stress and burnout and mental health and that load which you're experiencing, like many of us are,
Yeah.
it's normal life, isn't it? With the work that you do, what are you seeing in general out there right now around stress and burnout in women?
I think it is, like you say, it's the mental load, and also it's the trying to do it all to the best of our abilities. Like, we don't want to be bad parents or bad company owners or employees or whatever it is, we want to be the best we can be, but across so many different areas. And I think now that, things like health and well-being are bigger topics and more issues, I think some people also find it's just more things to try and do. So now I've got to work out to the best of my ability and eat and do all these things. And I think the biggest thing is just everyone just trying to do too much, which is really hard because we want to do it all. But yeah, it's causing an awful lot of stress as well.
And do you feel like the level of chronic stress is increasing amongst women?
I think it is, and I think it is generally in everyone, really. I think we've gone from a place where stress in the kind of cave people days was necessary. It was keeping us alive, it was stop us getting eaten by saber-toothed tigers, and we don't have those big physical threats anymore. But the stress we do have is constant throughout the day. So it's more those little stresses all the time that's causing the biggest impact. And that's where you get the chronic stress from. So it's everything from our alarms going off in the morning, social media, like it's just noise constantly in our lives. And all of those little stresses throughout the day are what causes actually more damage sometimes than the big kind of trauma events.
Yeah, and I'm hearing so many people talk about this, people in the health care system or sector, scientists, lots of different experts talking about the challenges we're facing because of the world we live in, which has brought lots of opportunity and pluses, being technically connected and everything that technology has offered us. But at the same time, it means that everything is always on.
Yeah.
And it's certainly, from what I can see, having a 17-year-old daughter as well, making everything really accessible and instant. And because of how we're wired as humans, we want things there and then, like we
Yeah.
want the reward. And social media especially, as well as lots of other forms of technology, allows us to have that, doesn't it? And so that's kind of feeding into the amount of stresses we have and then how stressed we feel because of those things.
Yeah. And I think the real key with it is a word that I love to use a lot, which is intention. Like sometimes we just feel like the world is happening to us. We're scrolling on social media and hours gone by and it's almost like we're not in control of it. But actually we are in control of a lot more than we think we are, whether that's the thoughts we think, our beliefs, our values, all of the things that make us who we are. We can control a lot more of it than we think we can. And I think this word intention for me is all about not just letting things happen to me, but actually being, how do I want my life to be? How do I want my day to go? And then setting myself up for success with that intention, rather than just going, well, we'll see how today turns out, and then being disappointed with the result. So it's really about having that control where you can have it, to make things a little bit easier, smoother, less stressful.
And I'm really smiling at Gail here because, funny enough, on the morning that we're recording this, I was out on my little commute to work walk, as I call it. I did 10 minutes and I went onto Instagram stories and was talking about a tip with intention, because exactly as you've explained there, we all have really busy lives and lots of things to do when we think about it in that way as well. To do, we have to do this, or I should do this in a day. And we can get caught up in that cycle of day to day, just doing whatever comes up. Sometimes, we think ahead what we need to do, but often that gets railroaded with the next email in the inbox or the phone call or a conversation with someone and so on. And so I was talking about how I have quite a busy day today, lots of different things to juggle work-wise and family, and really getting intentional, not just about the practical tasks, but also how I want to feel. And that's been a huge shift for me. And I guess that links into what you shared, Gail, with your habit of creating some pauses and space to just kind of check in and go, where am I and how am I feeling? And am I feeling the way I want to feel today? And am I doing the things I want to do? And it's incredible, isn't it, how just bringing some mindfulness to how you want to feel and what you want to achieve can then bring your awareness back to when you aren't ticking those boxes, that you're suddenly on Instagram, you're like, oh, that wasn't in the plan for today. Come on,
Yeah.
Nicola, you're scrolling, for 10, 15 minutes here, and yet you've said you want to feel in control and focused and productive. Is this in alignment with that? And so it's really powerful, isn't it? Very simple, very hard to do and implement, but you can build it as a habit, and then it can offer, I think, in my experience, lots and lots of different shifts in how you feel and go about what you do need to do.
I mean, it's really hard. Our brains are wired to be negative. Our brains are wired to look for the threats and look for all these things that might cause us harm. But we do have control over that. And we are able to focus on something different if we do practice. Like you say, it's practice. It's not always easy, but finding the time, we say, so many of us say, I haven't got time for that. Actually, until we sit down and really look at, well, why? What am I spending my time doing? What would I rather be doing? How is that going to benefit me instead? But a lot of us don't take the time to actually do that exercise in the first place, to have that clarity about, well, what is it I do want? I know what I don't want because it's what I've got, but what do I want? And how am I going to achieve that? And what can I do to really help myself achieve that? And it's just those moments of just getting that clarity. And then, like you say, backing that up with real intention of, okay, well, if I want my day to go like this, what do I need to do that? Whether it's going for a walk or taking a moment, or, whatever the healthy habits are that's going to help you get that.
Yeah. And so let's go back in time a bit, because your life wasn't always this way. You have quite a backstory of struggling with stress and stress leading to burnout. So I'd love for you to share a bit about that and what that looked like for you, and whether you knew it was happening at the time and you'd put this label of stress onto what you were experiencing.
Mm-hmm. I think the interesting thing looking back at my journey, so I had a corporate career in the construction industry, which I kind of fell into, but was good at what I was doing. I was getting promoted. And I think the interesting thing was I left 10 years ago. So things were different then. Mental health, wellbeing, not such a topic that was talked about. And in fact, looking back, I only realize I suffered from burnout looking back now. I didn't realize it at the time. I knew that I was physically unwell. I knew I was emotionally all over the place, like all of the boxes that we can now tick looking at something like burnout. I knew I was stressed at the time, but also I was surrounded by people that were also stressed. So I just thought that was my norm. This is how people are. You go to work during the week, you're really stressed. You come home at the weekend doesn't feel long enough. You try and, cram in all these things to make yourself feel better. Then you start dreading Monday again, and back goes the cycle. But I had been brought up in a very similar way. My dad had, he was a lawyer and had a very kind of stressful job. And I just honestly thought this was how life was. Look, my friends would be doing the same. And it was only when I started to really suffer and someone had mentioned to me about working with a coach. And again, coaches 10 years ago, not as prevalent as they are now. And so I went to this coach and she said, well, what do you want to work on? And I said, I need to be better at my job, because I thought all of my stress was coming from the fact that I wasn't good enough. So she helped me break that down, have a look at my limiting beliefs. Why was I thinking this way? She said, you've just been promoted to, at the time I was a managerial position with over 100 people I was looking after. And she said, what makes you think you're not good at your job? Because obviously someone thinks that you are. So we broke all of that down. But one of the most powerful questions she asked me was, what makes you happy? And I struggled to answer the question, because at that time, I didn't know. I'm doing this job. I'm having an all right time at the weekend, but it's sort of a stopgap between going back the next week. And I realized that all of the success boxes I was ticking, I wasn't sure whose they were. They weren't mine. I had a good job, a company car, prospects, good salary. But was that actually what I really wanted? And for me, one of the biggest changes in my story was just doing what we've talked about already, which is sitting down saying, what do I want? I'm not sure I want this, but everyone's telling me, well, this is life. You have a job you probably don't like very much and you get through it. But what do I really want? And that was the key thing for me, was sitting down to really work out that I didn't want what I currently had, and what was I going to do about it.
Yeah, and that story is so repeatable in different ways and forms for lots of the guests I've had on the podcast and clients, in that it often takes us and our own health hitting a crisis point, or this realization of, I just can't continue this way. Something has already gone wrong, or something is about to get worse. I know that this is not good. Or perhaps it's external and it's somebody else's health, or a family situation and so on. And it's like, why does it take something like that to make us pause and reflect and realize that we aren't living in a way that, one, makes us happy, but two, is ultimately negatively affecting how we feel in our long-term health as well. And this is what I'm ultimately trying to shift, is not having women reach that point. And what I'm seeing is, in midlife, it's often the time when it's like the perfect storm, with all of the hormonal changes that perimenopause and menopause bring, and perhaps lots of changes navigating, if you have children, a partner, career. And I think what is going on in our brains as our hormones change makes us just disassociate almost with where we are in life and who we are. And often we have ended up on this path by default, because we didn't really know that we should be asking, well, what do I want? What matters to me? What are my values? What's going to bring me happiness? We just fall out of college or university and need a job because we need an income. And then that begins whatever path, it is for us. And for many of us, it ends up taking us somewhere career-wise, and then possibly also relationship, as well as the relationship with ourselves, in a direction that isn't really us. And so for you, what was that big kind of realization and connection you had with who you really were, that wasn't in alignment with how things had been up to that point?
I think for me it was, I reached the rock bottom of, literally, I'm not a big crier, but at the time, crying on my way to work, crying on my way home. I remember standing in the shower one morning thinking, if there was a fire in my house, like, not that I didn't want anyone to get hurt or too much to get damaged, but surely then I could have a day off and things like that. And looking back, I think that's not normal. Like, you shouldn't be in that position. But at the time, all I could think was, I have to do this job. I'm good at this job. I want to succeed at this. Being a woman in such a male-dominated industry as well, I felt like I was representing, I'd kind of fought to get there, and now I couldn't do it. And I was just letting everyone down. Like, I was letting womankind down by proving that actually I couldn't, like, I had to keep going. And I remember my car breaking down on the way to work one day and having to sit on the side of the motorway for 5 hours and thinking, and I messaged the office and said, I haven't got much battery, I need to just be off my phone. I will not be contactable until I'm rescued. And I remember thinking at the end of the day, I've just sat on the side of a motorway for 5 hours. I've had to, wee in a bush. I've had no food. And actually, this has been one of the best days I've had in a long time. And I was like, this, and I think it was those things where maybe at the time, like, looking back, it seems even worse. But at the time, I just thought, I don't want this anymore. But I didn't know what to do instead.
Yeah.
What did this mean? If I left this job, what was I going to do instead? This is what I trained to do. This is what I was doing. I'd been working in this industry for nearly 15 years. What was I going to do instead? And I think, fortunately for me, the huge turning point was working with a coach. It was being able to work with someone to really just break all that stuff down for me, and help me realize that, my happiness did matter, my well-being did matter, and that there were things that I could do about it. I wasn't stuck in this situation, because I think that's why I hadn't done anything sooner. I just felt, I don't know what the other options are. So yeah, that was kind of the turning point, really.
Oh, God, that's so. I had goosebumps when you were saying, about hoping there was a fire to have a day off work and then enjoying a motorway abandonment, breakdown experience to have that time away from work. Yeah. And I know you talk a lot about stresses, and this is something I really wanted to open up in the episode as well, was what stress really is, because you talk clearly about the stresses, so the things that could cause us to feel stressed. So like breaking down on a motorway is of course a huge stressor, and how we respond to that is, then open to what the level of stresses we feel. But thinking about, like, as you were sharing your story there, you've got the stresses of the job itself, like the tasks, the deadlines, perhaps challenges managing a huge team the size that you were. And then you were also carrying a lot of other stresses around your own personal value and expectation, which again I know is very normal for so many women. So it's like we're bombarding ourselves from every angle with all of these stresses that then can lead to this enormous stress. Like, was it the job itself with you, or was it that pressure you were putting on yourself to be the best person possible in that kind of role?
I think at the time, being in it, all I could see was the stress coming from outside. So it was the job role, the deadlines, the responsibility. We went through redundancies. I had to lay people off. That was a horrible experience. So I saw it as my job is stressful. But at that point, I had no understanding, and no one teaches you these things. And unless you actually voluntarily put yourself into the personal development world, you're not going to know how much actually is internal. Every decision I was making, every way I was viewing my job and my colleagues and everything else was through the lens of, I don't really think I should be here, and I'm not good enough to be here. So all of that was adding to the pressure, adding to what was going on. But I had no idea. It wasn't until I was working with my coach that I was even aware that these things kind of were going on. So for me, it was all about ability. I'm just not good enough at this. I need to be better at it. And then if I'm better at it, it won't be so stressful because other people seem to be coping. This is the other thing. You kind of look around and, there were other people in my position and higher. And I'm like, well, they don't seem to be breaking down on the way to work. Or not that anyone knew I was. That was the other thing. It was all very, as soon as I was in there, smile on, keep it together. And I was very, I wasn't failing at my job. So, I was managing all of that. But yeah, you kind of look around and you think, well, everyone else is coping. It must be me. And if it is me, then, and again, that then just kind of perpetuates the same kind of thought process.
What you've said there is literally what I used to be saying to myself all of the time. And as you now know, lots of people in that same position as you thought at work, you felt you were abnormal and that you were the only one experiencing that, and everybody else was great and perfect at juggling the stress and the workload. And I know I was the same. I used to think, why do I feel all of this pressure, and why are these deadlines really challenging for me, and why am I struggling and staying behind late at work, and why do I feel like this? But you don't see that actually everyone else is feeling that. And I know it's slow, but the investment many companies are now making in wellness and supporting their employees' health and well-being, it's allowing a safe space for people to share things like this, which I do think is so important, because that internal narrative, when you do feel that you're abnormal and different from everyone else, is really harmful, isn't it? And so if people can share this and open up and then get support, it's going to help alleviate some of those stresses that are, self-made almost.
Yeah. And it's interesting how things have changed. fortunately, like you say, companies are investing in employee well-being now. But I think there's also more information available to us as individuals if we want to seek it out, as to how we can, start to make some changes. The hardest thing is that word change, though. As humans, we don't like it. We don't want to do it. We put up a load of barriers, a load of excuses in the way. And it is hard when you want something different, but either you don't know how to, which fortunately nowadays, we can access that information, but it's then the actual doing it, which is the hardest part, because we don't want to change. We don't know what the alternative might be. And it's an awful lot of work and effort, and, it's hard.
Yeah, and as we said, our own mind is so powerful. And when it comes to wanting to make change, we have that internal narrative as well, telling us, as you said at the beginning, we don't have time. We're too busy. We've got too many different things to juggle. And so, we'll just have to put that off until the kids are older, or I can get a different job and create time somewhere. Or perhaps it's, when I've got more money to invest in that. We're very good at giving ourselves all of these powerful excuses as to why we can't do something, which helps us, I think, to feel very safe. And then, as you say, from a human nature perspective, stay in the status quo as we are, which is what we're wired to do, essentially. So thinking about change, I touched on the stresses and then how stress actually plays out. That's one of your tips, isn't it? Is that reframing and knowing that there are all of these different stresses, but they themselves aren't the stress. So I'd love you to explain that a little bit, because I do think for most of us, we aren't taught this stuff in general, in mainstream. And so we just think of stress as this, everything's the same. It's like, oh, well, money's stress, or relationships are stress, or the kids are stressful. So yeah, if you could chat into that a bit, that would be, I think, really helpful for people.
Well, I love anyone that loves a book. Mo Gawdat's recent book, Unstressable, which is incredible if you want to read about stress. But he breaks down the 4 different types of stress. Now, 2 of them are the really kind of big trauma type stuff. But it's actually, like we said before, it's the little stressors all the time that actually are causing this kind of chronic stress that we're seeing in a lot of people. And they can come from external or internal. And I actually believe it's the internal stuff that if you can conquer that, then everything else is a lot easier. And this is all to do with the way that we're thinking, the way we're programmed, our beliefs, our values, all of that kind of really integral stuff. And what happens when that gets challenged is that it does feel stressful. And the problem is that the actual way that our body deals with stress is very natural and is actually over within 90 seconds. So if you have a stressful incident happen, obviously your body floods with all those stress hormones, you get into that fight or flight, you respond in whichever way is necessary. So if you're stepping off the curb and you see a car coming, you get that like surge of hormones, you step back on and everything settles back down to normal. The problem that we do now is that we have these stresses, which aren't these big physical things, but, an email from a client, let's say, the stress level rises. Now, technically within our bodies, it should take 90 seconds for that hormones to drop back down and go back to normal. But what we do now is we attach so much other stuff to that we perpetuate it. So let's say you get an email that you weren't expecting, it's some bad news. Rather than deal with that within those 90 seconds, let your body deal with the hormones and then start to logically think about, okay, so what are the next steps? We start attaching all this internal stuff to it. So it might be, well, maybe they didn't like me, or maybe I didn't do this right, or maybe it's because I'm not good enough, or maybe it's so then we start to add our stories to it. And that's what perpetuates it. So you'll be thinking about it an hour later, a day later, a week later, it might still be playing on your mind. And that's not because of the original stress. That has gone. You are now perpetuating it by adding all of your stories and that kind of continual thinking that we do. So it's actually this internal stuff that's making all of the stresses that we have to deal with worse, because as Mo says in his book, it's, you know, it's not the actual event. It's what we make of it. It's what we turn it into. It's the stories we attach to it that actually make it the thing that lasts for such a long time and has such a detrimental effect to our health, because that's chipping away at you all of the time. You're elongating that process, which actually is quite a quick one biologically, but we're adding to it with the kind of mental and emotional side of things.
Yeah, and I think when you hear this for the first time, it is really a light bulb moment, because you're kind of like, God, yeah, I do that. And the problem is that that one email is one thing, but the way our lives are, as we said, super busy, that email is probably at the same time or in the same 90 seconds as maybe reading a text message from your husband telling you that, I don't know, he's forgot to pick the kids up from school or something, or a parent telling you there's a problem. And then you're also thinking about, oh, I forgot to go to the shops and get this for tea. And, you know, there's multiple things often happening all at the same time. And so we're in this heightened state of response and stress, aren't we? Which I think is this kind of new challenge we're experiencing as humans because of how the world's shifted in, I would say, probably the last 15, 20 years is, you know, if we think back to perhaps when our parents were growing up, I'm not saying life was necessarily any easier, but it was certainly different, and it wasn't as complex and hectic in the way that our world and lives are today.
And I think it's also the case that, as you were saying at the beginning, because of technology, we're available to everything all at once. So, you know, like you say, when our parents, when my dad used to work, he used to work long hours, but when he was at home, unless he brought something home with him to work on, no one could contact him. He didn't have an email. He didn't have a mobile. So it was a lot easier to switch off for things. Whereas now, like you say, you'll be at work still dealing with a drama from home or a drama from somewhere, because everything is constantly accessing you all the time. And that's where something like boundaries is so important. When you can learn to put in boundaries to protect yourself, whether it's shutting your laptop at a certain time and that's it, whether you have like a different room to work in than you do for other things. You know, I stopped replying to a lot of messages instantly, and I try and like have a time of the day where it's like, right, now I'll sit down and reply to messages, because I didn't like that constant, you're being drawn from one thing to another, one drama to the next. So there are things you can do, but like you said, I think society has not helped it, because everything is immediate, everything's always on. You know, you can just, even world events, you know, you used to have to wait for it to be in the news or in the newspaper. Now within seconds, everyone knows everything. So yeah, we're just living in that very noisy world.
And as you said at the start as well, many women have this pressure on themselves to do it all. You know, there's a lot we've culturally inherited and is being passed, you know, from generation to generation, and being caregivers and, you know, running a great home, having all of the pieces of that together, as well as now many of us having a career, whether it's as an employee or a self-employed person. And so we've got all of these different balls to juggle. And I do feel like social media puts a lot of pressure on to women to live what appears to be a perfect life. And so all of those things are those stresses, as you touched on. We've got, you know, all of those internal beliefs and stories and so on running, but we've got all of these external pressures that are coming at us as well. And I think that's, for me, one of the biggest pieces of awareness we can kind of ground ourselves in as women, to know that there's a lot being thrown at us, and it isn't healthy to have all of this stuff. And certainly in the work that I do around menopause, many women can kind of get away with it. You know, you think, that's all right, I can do this. And it isn't good, and it's not healthy, and we shouldn't be living this way in our 20s or 30s. But when your hormones start to shift and things really do become imbalanced, it's impossible to juggle all of those balls and have all of those thoughts and things going on all of the time.
Yeah. And I think it's, you know, that time where we did go from, you know, maybe just being in the home and having kids to now, you know, it's amazing that women can, be out in the workplace as well, whether, like you say, that's employed or running your own company. But none of that other stuff's gone away. So we're trying to be, still all of the things together, and now, having the career and, doing everything else. And we set ourselves such ridiculously high expectations, more than we'd ever put on anyone else, to be the best at everything we're trying to be. And unfortunately, we can't do it all. We can't do it all without some kind of, triggers and stress and all of the things that we've talked about, because it is just too much for anyone to kind of cope with. And I think again it goes back to that point of working out what is it you want. I run my own business and I love that and I want that, but I also really, really important for me to be there for my kids, and they're still relatively young. I know that I can't do both. I can't work as much as I need to work to make my business what I need it to be and be there for that. There's just not enough hours in the day, however you try and plan it. So at some point, you have to make that decision as what's going to give. And the crucial bit is being okay with that. Whatever that decision is, right, today the work's just going to stop because I'm going to go and do this instead, but not beat yourself up for it, not judge yourself for it, not have the guilt for it, but actually just say, this is the decision I'm having to make right now, and I'm okay with it, and I'm going to go with it. And I think a lot of that, like you say, that the mental load and everything else comes with the added guilt and with what should I do? And like you say, things like social media adding to that, everyone looking like they can do it all. And have no consequences, and yet you're trying to do it all, and there are consequences.
So that brings me on to guilt, because I think that's such a relevant topic, and I know it's something you openly speak about a lot, that as women, and if you are a mother, carrying that guilt of doing things for yourself, and also, as we talk about how to change and bring some of these tools and tips in as habits to help reduce stress and overwhelm. I'm thinking about some of what you were sharing is, all of these little mindset things in themselves are things to change and do, and essentially are self-care habits. But we often think about the self-care as being the more, I don't know, special treat kind of stuff, of perhaps taking a nice bath with a candle on and some soft music and relaxing, or I don't know, treating yourself to a facial or a massage if you're fortunate enough to be able to do something like that. But all of the things that we really need to think about, like intention setting and aligning with who we are and knowing our values, all of those essentially are self-care habits, aren't they? The things that are caring for ourselves. And so how did you find that in your journey to really reframe self-care and not carry that guilt, having young children?
Yeah, and I think it was, kids are one of the most triggering things in terms of stress and things like that. But I think it was times with my children where, like you say, the nice long baths or going to get your nails done, they're amazing. And I would say that everyone should put time in for those things if they can. But when my kids are arguing at tea time and the phone's going, and I know there's something else I haven't dealt with, I'm not rushing off for a nail appointment. I can't say, sorry, kids, this is my time now, I'm going. So for me, it was about, well, I need to find the things that I can use in the moment, as well as the things I can kind of set time aside to do. Because in the weeks where I don't have that time to set aside to do, that's it then. We're just not having any self-care this week. We'll just fumble through. And, I couldn't continue like that.
Yeah.
So for me, it was about finding as many tools as possible to be able to use in the moment, in an ordinary day, with all the stuff that we have going on that didn't need me to leave my house or book an appointment or spend some money, but just do the thing that made me feel better in the moment. And I think that's been one of the biggest things for me. I love all the treat stuff, still do all of that. But when I don't, I know that I also have the backup of doing things every day to help look after myself.
And that is such a mindset shift to make as a woman as well, I think, is to recognize that it's in all of those small, consistent, sometimes maybe boring, habits that actually will add up to be the self-care, to be the things that, as you've shared about, help reduce anxiety from being triggered and having panic attacks, reducing overwhelms that you want in chronic stress. So to kind of bring us to wrap up, I know you've shared lots of different insights and tips. I'd love to know from you, what would be 3 simple steps you'd suggest someone can take to, I guess, build these self-care habits essentially, so that they aren't feeling as stressed and overwhelmed on such a regular basis?
Yeah. So I think the first one we'll go back to is having that clarity and awareness about what's going on in your life, because we can so easily say, I'm stressed, I don't have time, everything's stressful. But actually, when you sit down and look at it, it's not usually everything that is the same level of stress. So I love to do a simple exercise, just take a few different areas of my life, like career, family, friends, those kind of things, and just have a look at each one of them. Out of 10, how happy am I? How are things going? Because it's then you start to see, okay, so it's not everything. It is maybe just 1 or 2 areas. And once you get that clarity on those 1 or 2 areas, you can really start to focus in on where is, the most stress coming from. So that would be tip number 1, to just get that clarity, get out of that kind of overwhelmed feeling of just everything is stressful, and just work out where the stress is coming from. The second tip would be the language that we use. So this is not just in talking with other people, but also that kind of narrative inside our head. So the language of, I'm so stressed, I don't have time, those kind of things. And try to get a bit sort of leading on from the first one is ask yourself, using the word exactly, like, what exactly am I stressed about? What exactly am I overwhelmed about? What exactly don't I have time to do? Because we say, I don't have time. Well, what are you trying to do? Do you need 5 minutes? Do you need 20 minutes? Where can you find that? So it's really just getting super clear helps you to then actually be able to take some action, rather than feeling like you're just stuck and can't do anything. And the third thing is about the 90-second rule we've talked about. So where our emotions kind of go up in that first kind of stressful incident, if you can just sit with the 90 seconds, you will see that it will naturally kind of start to drop off. And then it's about being really conscious that you're not adding to it with all of your kind of stuff and perpetuating it. So it's catching yourself, a couple of hours later saying, why am I still thinking about that email? Like, that's gone now. So what am I telling myself? What are the reasons why I'm kind of continuing this? Because again, that clarity and that awareness will really help you deal with some of the stressful situations.
I love all of those tips. They're really good. And the self-awareness piece is just like so valuable, isn't it? And as you found, and now know, being a coach, when you work with a coach, that's what I think is really the light bulb moment, the ta-da, is when you start to actually become aware of who you are, how you think, how you feel, and why. That's just where you kind of begin to make those shifts. And it doesn't mean that everything becomes easy and you can put all of these habits in place. As you said, you've got lots of different things that you're juggling with children and a house renovation and a business and so on. But the self-awareness is just the starting point for it all, essentially, isn't it?
And I think for me, the biggest thing after self-awareness is realizing how in control I can actually be. Because I think a lot of us just feel like all of this stuff just happens to me and I've just got to keep riding the roller coaster, where actually there's so much we can do. Like, just focus on the things you can control, not the things you can't. Life's always going to throw stuff at you. There's always going to be that phone call you don't want, that email that tells you something you didn't want to hear. You can't stop that stuff, but there's so much you can control. And if you focus on that, it does start to just make everything that little bit easier.
And you said something that I've just scribbled down, happening to me. That mindset many of us have of I don't know, say there's a traffic jam or someone cuts you up on the road and nearly pushes you off, or something like that. And our natural tendency is to go with that, oh, why has that happened to me? Or, why is it there's traffic jam today when I need to get to this meeting on time, and so on. And yeah, I think that, as you said, that internal language and self-awareness of all of that is something that can really be a game changer for managing stress. So I'm going to pop everything with regard to connecting with Gail into the show notes, but I'd love to just give you a bit of space to let people know where they can find out more about you and how to connect if they'd like to find out more about the work that you do with individuals or corporate teams.
Yeah, fabulous. Well, my website, gailgrace.co.uk, and I'm on LinkedIn as well, and would love to connect with anyone that would like to do so.
Brilliant. And as I say, I'll pop some links into the show notes. I just, really appreciate you sharing your story, because I know so many of us can connect, and it's through stories like this with real people that, the women can know that they're not alone, and what they're experiencing often as well isn't normal, and that we don't have to be stuck in that spin cycle of overwhelm and just do, go. So yeah, I challenge you listening to think about one thing you can take away from what Gail has shared, maybe one of those 3 tips to get started with, because it is about those small steps and habits. And both Gail and I support people in building sustainable, healthy habits. And it is, hard, as we said, to change, but it is absolutely possible for any one of us. It's just about using some of these tools and tips to create these habits that become a part of who you are. So thank you so much, Gail. Really appreciate your time.
Thank you. And just as you said there, it's people like you doing podcasts like this that mean that, people listening don't feel so alone, don't feel so stuck. So yeah, just thank you for having me on, and keep doing the great work.
Oh, thank you. You're welcome.